Good evening, hello and welcome. You're with the news today. This is your primetime destination, news, newsmakers, talking points. Our big talking point now, the battle between Israel and Hamas has now reached the United Nations. Israel taking on the UN, calling for the resignation of the UN Secretary General. The big question, how does one de-escalate the Gaza war? We'll have several special guests joining us, both from New York, from Jerusalem, as well as from the Palestinian areas. But first, as always, it's time for the 9 headlines at 9. Israel calls for the resignation of UN Chief Antonio Guterres after the Secretary General condemns atrocities against Palestinians. Guterres reiterates he condemns Hamas terror, but it doesn't justify the collective punishment of Palestinians in Gaza. Hamas, Hezbollah and Islamic Jihad chiefs huddle in Lebanon's capital of Beirut. Iran's supreme leader warns Israeli forces incapable now of confronting Muslim fighters. It's official, Ayodhya's Ram Temple inauguration will be held on January 22nd next year. Prime Minister Modi to attend the Ram idol consecration ceremony in Ayodhya. Amidst a diplomatic row, India resumes selective visa services in Canada. A month after suspending them, visas will only be issued for entry, business and medical purposes. NCRT stirs a political controversy after a committee recommends changing India to Bharat in school textbooks. India allies, Congress and AAP hit out, claim BJP distorting history for political gain. National capital Delhi shrouded in smog once again as pollution levels continue to deteriorate. Stubble burning cases surge in Punjab. BJP blames AAP government for the pollution spike. A blow to the BJP in poll-bound Telangana. Their star campaigner Rajagopal Reddy resigns, returns to the Congress fold, says BJP failed to emerge as an alternative to BRS. Market turmoil continues. Nearly 15 lakh crore rupees wiped out in 5 days. Israel-Hamas war casts a long shadow on Dalal Street. But tonight's breaking news that's coming in at the moment, the Ram Mandir inauguration will now take place on the 22nd of January. It's official now. The Prime Minister will attend the Ram idol consecration ceremony in Ayodhya. Prime Minister Modi has tweeted and said, "It is my good fortune that in my lifetime I will witness this historic occasion." So that's now confirmed that on the 22nd of January, the Ram Mandir official inauguration will take place in Ayodhya with the Prime Minister in attendance. Joining me now, Nipendra Mishra, Chairman Sri Ram Janmabhoomi Trust. Appreciate your joining us, Mr. Mishra. We can see those pictures of you along with various sons meeting the Prime Minister. Can you give us more details of what is planned on the 22nd of January?
Thank you, Rajdeep, for giving me this opportunity. First, let me tell you that 4 members of the trust, including Mr. Champat Rai, Swami Govind Devgiri, and Vishnu Prasanna Peace of Udupi, including myself, we all were given time in the afternoon today. We called on the Prime Minister and renewed our invitation to him. He was kind enough to accept, and he is going to come. And the consecration, as you just now mentioned, is at 12:30. But this is a very elaborate, let us say, the celebration, but more important than that is the religious ceremony. The ceremony starts from 15th of January. There will be various prayers relating to Lord, ultimately culminating to the consecration.
But may I ask you this, Mr. Mishra, when you say various ceremonies, you say there will be religious ceremonies, there will be those, because this next year is an election year, who will wonder whether you are only inviting Prime Minister Modi, will you also invite leaders from different parties? Will this be seen as a political event or is it purely a religious event?
It is an event where we are, in a way, addressing the long-awaited expectation getting fulfilled of the citizens of the country. There is no politics in it. We are not inviting political leaders. Mostly the invitation would go to those eminent persons who have contributed to the nation building, and particularly in the construction, or let us say stages leading to construction of the temple. So those are the kinds of people. Of course, there will be invitation to various representatives of sects, religious belief. They will be invited, and they are roughly, in a country such as ours, at least 2,500 people, saints and sadhus, practitioners of different kind of faith. They will all be invited to this occasion.
Will you invite, are you planning to invite any other political party leaders as well, or will this be largely only the Prime Minister and the other guests that you just mentioned?
The invitation would be restricted. If you are talking of political persons, I think it would be restricted to the Prime Minister, the Chief Minister of Uttar Pradesh, and Governor of Uttar Pradesh. No other invitation is being extended to political personalities.
And just one final question. You said that the pujas and the religious ceremonies will start on the 15th, will conclude on the 22nd. 22nd effectively will be the conclusion of what starts on the 15th. And then will the temple be open to all devotees after the 22nd?
Yeah, you are right. It will get concluded on 22nd. You know, the belief is that the Lord sees the world, or he gets the pran pratishtha, when the band which is tied on his eyes, that will be removed around 12:30. Your other question, from 23rd, the devotees would be permitted to have the darshan of Lord.
Okay. Nipendra Mishra ji, for joining us and telling us that it is now official that 22nd will be the inauguration or the consecration of the idol at the Ram Mandir, followed by which devotees from the 23rd will be allowed for darshan. You are telling us the Prime Minister, UP Chief Minister and the Governor will be the three political, in a way, dignitaries invited. Thank you very much for speaking to me and giving us those details. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay, so Nipendra Mishra there announcing in a way that the Ram Mandir run up to 2024 elections. January will be the month where the focus will be on Ram Mandir. That is now raging on for the 19th day. But now there's a twist. Israel finds itself locked in a war of words with the United Nations Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, who has condemned the loss of life in Gaza. Israel's representatives of the UN have gone to the extent of calling for Gutterz to step down, saying he didn't do enough to condemn the Hamas terror attack. The Secretary General has made it clear he's not pro-Hamas, but that Palestinians cannot face collective punishment for what happened on October 7th. It's our top story.
Israel's war on Hamas has sparked a showdown at the United Nations, where a divided world is sparring over the bombardment of Gaza Strip that has killed and displaced thousands of civilians. The UN Security Council's first discussion on the war was overshadowed by a row triggered by comments made by the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres that appeared to rationalize Hamas terror attacks on October 7th.
It is important to also recognize the attacks by Hamas did not happen in a vacuum. The Palestinian people have been subjected to 56 years of suffocating occupation.
Israel took grave offense to the UN Secretary General's statement, accusing him of tolerating and justifying a terror attack. An angry Israeli Foreign Minister, Eli Cohen, cancelled his meeting with Gutterz, and the country demanded the Secretary General's resignation.
When you say those terrible words that these heinous attacks did not happen in a vacuum, you are tolerating terrorism. And by tolerating terrorism, you are justifying terrorism.
Antonio Guterres clarified his remark, saying that grievances of Palestinians do not justify Hamas attack, but added that the Hamas attacks cannot justify killings of Gazans either. The US firmly backed Israel's right to defend itself and called all acts of terrorism unlawful and unjustifiable, whether they are carried out by ISIS, Boko Haram, Lashkar-e-Taiba, or by Hamas.
All acts of terrorism are unlawful and unjustifiable, whether they're carried out by ISIS, by Boko Haram, by Al-Shabaab, by Lashkar-e-Taiba, or by Hamas.
India urged all parties involved in the war to protect civilian lives.
We stood in solidarity with Israel at their moment of crisis when they were facing these terror attacks. Our heartfelt condolences to the families of the victims and prayers for speedy recovery of the injured. Civilian casualties in the ongoing conflict are a matter of serious and continuing concern. All parties must protect civilians, especially women and children.
A representative for Palestine called for end to the war.
We are here today to stop the killing, to stop the massacres being committed against the Palestinian people. The ongoing massacres being deliberately and systematically and savagely perpetrated by Israel, the occupying power. It is our collective human duty to stop them.
The UN Security Council is deeply divided. While some countries are calling for a ceasefire, Israel has time and again asserted that the war will end only after Hamas is finished. Bureau Report, India Today.
And joining me now is a very special guest from New York. Michael Mayan is Deputy Ambassador of Israel to the United Nations. Appreciate you joining us, Michael, there from New York. I want to ask you right away. It appears at the moment Israel is heading for a headlong collision with the United Nations and United Nations Secretary General Gutterres in particular. Your ambassador to the UN today calling for him to resign immediately because of his comments on the Israel-Hamas war. Am I correct?
Thank you for having me, Rajdeep, and talking about this very, very important subject. I have to be very honest with you. I don't think there's any Israeli right now that isn't deeply disappointed from the Secretary General's statement last night. He was actually justifying the horrible massacre of October 7. Claiming that these actions did not happen in a vacuum is outrageous. It really exemplifies the biased approach that the UN in general holds towards Israel. And just to have a clear feeling about how we feel regarding that statement, I seriously doubt that statement would have been made in comparison to other horrible events, such as the use of chemical weapons by Saddam Hussein against Iran, or the horrible terror attacks that happened on November 26 in India. So this attempt to contextualize and justify the events is seen very gravely, and our expectation in Israel is for the Secretary General to issue an apology and retract that statement.
No, Ms. Mayan, you're calling for an apology. The fact is, Mr. Guterres has made a statement which he's posted on Twitter, X that is, the grievances of the Palestinian people cannot justify the horrific attacks by Hamas. Those horrendous attacks cannot justify the collective punishment of the Palestinian people. And then he goes on to say that effectively the rules of war must be obeyed. What's the problem you have with that statement?
Yes, but again, I think this is another example of a narrative that is being portrayed by the Secretary General and by the UN. Israel is at war. We are at war with a terrorist organization, which is Hamas. And the fact that the Secretary General cannot put the responsibility on the war, on the suffering of civilians, both on the Israeli side and the Palestinian side, on the Hamas terrorist organization, is a problem when approaching the situation and the conflict we're having right now. So, of course, he had some strong statements, and he began his statement by saying that there is no possible way to justify these events. But then he continued with that very poorly choice of words about the events not happening in a vacuum. And again, we expect Secretary General to really retract that statement and show Israel that the UN and himself are not holding this this really horrible narrative regarding the horrible massacre that happened on October.
Ma'am, I don't think that is just Guterres' narrative. A number of world leaders with due regard are saying, yes, what Hamas did on October 7th is terrible, is brutal. Israel has every right to self-defense, but that does not justify the collective punishment of the Palestinian people with the kind of bombing that's going on. Some reports suggesting more than 3,000 people have been killed already. It's not just the UN Secretary General. There are a number of people saying that what happened leading to loss of lives in Israel is terrible, but what is happening now is also terrible. Will Israel accept that reality or live in denial?
I think Israel has accepted the fact that innocent Palestinian civilians are paying the price of the action of the terrorist organization Hamas. And again, I think a lot of leaders have recognized the atrocities that happened. Some leaders, unfortunately, a lot of the leaders in the Arab world and in the Middle East have not yet condemned these actions, have only spoken up when civilian Palestinians have suffered from the terror that Hamas is inflicting on the region. I would argue that Hamas has committed horrible atrocities. He also took more than 200 hostages, and he's also, Hamas, the terrorist organization Hamas, is holding more than 2 million Palestinian hostages and has no problem in sacrificing them in a horrible war. Again, this is a war that we did not want, we didn't expect, but we will fight it and we will win it. And the win will be to demolish Hamas rule in Gaza, which will hopefully lead for a better future for the Palestinians as well.
Ma'am?
But like I mentioned before, this is a war, and civilians unfortunately suffer during war. But
Ms. Mayan, I accept that it is war, but at the same time, what the UN Secretary General is also saying, war doesn't justify the clear violations of international humanitarian law. The siege of Gaza, the bombardment of Gaza, should surely also be looked at. Protecting civilians, as he said, is paramount in any armed conflict. Israel also has certain responsibilities to the global world order.
We do. When we take these responsibilities very seriously, the IDF is doing everything in its power in order to protect civilians.
No, how?
But again, we are at war and our priority is protecting our civilians.
Ms. Mayan, you're saying you're doing everything in your power to protect civilians, but how are you doing it? The Gaza is one of the most densely populated areas of the world and you're bombing it every night.
We are providing warnings before we attack. This was not provided for our civilians. We are also allowing for humanitarian medicine and food to enter the Gaza Strip. Again, the world is right. There are rules of war, but there's also need to recognize reality on the ground. The reality of the ground is that the responsibility for the civilians in Gaza is by the ones who rule them, and that is the terrorist organization that is called Hamas. And when the Secretary General ignores that, when countries ignore that, they are not contributing to anything for the well-being of the Palestinian civilians. They are playing into the narrative of a terrorist organization. They're echoing lies made by this terrorist.
Ma'am, I respect your viewpoint, but do you believe, Michael Mayan, that these bombings are actually going to end the terror organization called Hamas? Because I'm hearing voices, including within Israel, Israeli journalists who have spoken, who fear that these kind of attacks will only create more Hamas-like organizations because of the brewing anger on the Arab street. Does that worry Israel at all?
Of course it does. And I think one should only listen to the recording that was released yesterday of the Hamas terrorist calling his parents and bragging about killing 10 people, and his parents calling him to carry on and supporting him. And I think that stands in grand contrast with what we saw yesterday when a hostage was actually released and she shook the hand of her captive. So again, this is absolutely the root of the problem. You know, when the Secretary General talks about a vacuum, there is no vacuum. There is education for hate. There's dehumanization of Israel, of Jews, which leads to these horrible attacks. We are doing what we need. We are defending our people. We are going to get to every single one of the terrorists that performs these horrible atrocities on October 7th. And after we do that, hopefully there will be room and there will be space for something better for the Palestinians and for Israel and for a peaceful, more peaceful Middle East.
Mikhail, you are saying that Israelis are being dehumanized. That's what October 7th did. But you've got the Palestinians who are claiming they have been dehumanized for decades, that Gaza today is an open prison. So there are two conflicting narratives playing out, and will one narrative respect at least the other's right to be heard?
Well, I would say that I would not agree with you on that. I think there is no Israeli that is happy about the fact that civilian Palestinians are dying. That is not the case. In addition, we have been allowing for many projects, billions of dollars to go into the Gaza Strip in order to develop it. But instead of developing infrastructure and school and hospitals, it has been developing terror and death. And I would add to that, that even now, as we speak, more missiles and rockets are being fired. We're talking about almost 8,000 rockets that have been fired from civilian populations towards civilian populations. And again, if this so-called open prison exists, where does all that terror and missiles arrive? So I would argue with both your claims on that matter.
Michel Mayan, let me turn to the exact statement that your ambassador to the United Nations made last night. He says the UN Secretary General, who shows understanding for the campaign of mass murder of children, women and the elderly, is not fit to lead the United Nations. I call on him to resign immediately. Is that the stand that Israel has, that the UN Secretary General must resign now? Is that the stand you're going to take?
Well, our belief is the U.S. Secretary General should show a bit more objectivity when describing horrible events of war. I think he would not have said the same statement on the war in Ukraine. And I think he should really consider his statement and show some remorse about that very unfortunate statement. That was also our official press release. And I can't blame our ambassador in New York for making that strong statement. Like I told you, everyone in Israel was deeply offended by the fact that the UN Secretary General, an organization that was established on the basis of never again, has given an attempt to contextualize and rationalize the horrible massacres of October 7th.
I will ask you again, ma'am, are you calling for his resignation? Are you saying that Mr. Guterres is unfit to lead the United Nations, or was that a statement made in anger?
We are calling for some soul searching on the Secretary General and some serious remorse on his part, and not the continuous biased stance towards Israel in the UN.
Okay. Mikhail Mayan, for joining me there from Geneva, UN Deputy, Israel's Deputy Secretary General to the United Nations. I appreciate you joining me, which is telling you those countless stories now of children who are losing it all in Gaza. Some have miraculously survived the airstrikes, but there are stories now of entire families that have been wiped out. Take a look.
Heartbreaking images continue to pour in from Gaza, of houses destroyed, of families broken apart. The children who survived the aerial strikes are considered the lucky ones. But are they really lucky? There are countless stories of children now orphaned with nowhere to go and nobody to care for them. These twins in Gaza, Wateen and Ahmed, had just finished breastfeeding and were put to sleep when an Israeli strike hit their home at around 2 a.m. in Gaza's Khan Yunis on 19th October. Their mother was killed instantly, but the twins survived and have now been separated. Wateen with her aunt being treated for injuries at the hospital, while Ahmed sent to stay with relatives.
She was protecting the boy, Ahmed, so he wasn't injured. But the daughter, as you can see, is injured. What did they do to deserve this? Ahmed is at home, and I am sure he feels the absence of his sister. As we say, twins are always connected. He's always crying at home, and she is in the hospital.
While 2-month-old Wateen remains in hospital, her brother has been sent far away. It could take years to ensure they live under the same roof again. Born together, but separated by war.
After the airstrike, we are the closest people to Wateen, but she doesn't recognize us. Her father plays with her, but she doesn't recognize him. Aside from the pain she is experiencing, a while ago there was an airstrike and she started to scream.
There are unfortunately many such incidents of children suffering the consequences of this war. 18-year-old Dima Alamdani and her family were among hundreds of thousands of Gaza residents fleeing the south to avoid the constant onslaught of Israeli airstrikes in the north. With nowhere else to go, family of 17 settled in a temporary shelter in Khan Yunis with hope that they had found temporary sanctuary. But overnight on 17th October, massive bombing at the shelter led to 13 of their relatives, including her parents and siblings, to perish. Alamdani has had to grow up overnight into an adult, having to identify the bodies of her immediate family at a local morgue.
I went to look for my mother, my father, and my siblings. At the first, they told me to come see your mother. They didn't show me her face, but I recognized her from what she has on her feet. God bless her soul. I felt heartbroken. It was like a nightmare. They opened my father's coffin and had no signs of injuries, but he died. God bless his soul. I had a 16-year-old sister among the dead, and they wrote my name on her coffin since they thought it was me. Her body didn't have any signs of injuries, but maybe she died from internal injuries.
This teenager has no time to mourn. She now has to care for her brother and 2 younger cousins who survived the bombing with her.
They showed me my little sister. She's in first grade, and they asked me who is she. At first I did not recognize her due to all the cuts and burns on her face. Then they wrote her name on her coffin. I would have never thought my family would end up like this. I felt heartbroken. It's a nightmare. I can't believe it until now that they are all dead. No one left.
These children have lost everything. Their home, their family, and now facing a daunting task of rebuilding their life with nothing and nobody to help. Bureau Report, India Today.
So how does one de-escalate the conflict in Israel versus Hamas at the moment? Joining me now, Fleur Hassan Nahum is Deputy Mayor in Jerusalem. Appreciate your joining us, ma'am. And I'm also joined at the moment by Professor Irfan Nuruddin, Senior Director, South Asia Center, Atlantic Council in Washington, D.C. Appreciate you, both of you joining us. Fleur, to you first. There seems to be less and less chance of any de-escalation of anything in the last few days. Bombardments are increasing. There are reports of more civilian deaths within Gaza. At the same time, anger building up in Israel. Give us your sense, Fleur. Do you see any possibility at all of any de-escalation, particularly with hostages still with the Hamas at the moment, more than 200?
Well, let me just add that everybody talks about the bombardments in Gaza, and people don't talk about the fact that we're under rocket fire here in Israel, in our main cities, and intensely in the south of the country. So much so that we have tens of thousands of people displaced right now from the south coming to Jerusalem and from the north coming to Jerusalem. So we are also under bombardment, constant from rockets. At the moment, I actually wouldn't say that people are getting angrier. People are very traumatized from what's happened, and people are very worried and in pain for the hostages. This is not a matter of anger and revenge. This is a matter of the fact that we have a terrorist regime in a border with Israel from a place that we left in 2005 in the hopes that the Palestinians would get some territory, that they could start the process of building themselves autonomy and a state. And instead, what we have here is Iran, a long arm of Iran here, the long arm of Iran in Hezbollah. So I don't see any de-escalation. I think Israel's been very prudent to plan this properly and not go in impulsively. And I think that's something to be said for Israel. And I think that many of the big world powers understand that it's not just a question of de-escalation or escalation. It's a question of the expansion of this as a regional conflict, because what we really have here is Iran playing a very dangerous game of chess, not just with the region, but with the world.
So what you seem to be suggesting, since you've referred to Iran, you've referred to Hezbollah, is actually far from de-escalation. You see this war now being fought on more than one front. Doesn't that worry you? Given the fact, again, that I repeat, there are more than 200 hostages still being held by Hamas, shouldn't that be the priority at the moment for the Israeli government above all else?
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. As a mother of 4 children, two of the mothers, one of them who has a child as a hostage, he's 23 years old, and his name is Hirsch Goldberg Poland. She's my friend, and we're family friends. And I know another mother who's got 2 little boys, 12 and 16, in there, and they haven't heard a thing. They don't know whether they're alive or dead. So for me, as a mother and as a leader, of course, the hostages is the most important thing. But you have to understand that we can no longer allow for a terrorist regime that doesn't just terrorize us. It's in their charter. They want to destroy us. It's existential for us to get rid of them. But they also endanger their own people.
You know, I'm coming back to you, Fleur, in a moment, because the fact is, a public opinion at the moment seems to be getting sharply divided, Professor Nuruddin. There are those who are saying, look at what is happening in Gaza, the bombardment, deaths toll crossing 2,000, 3,000 according to some figures, civilians there being killed. Do you see a de-escalation at all, or do you think now it's spiraled out of control? As Fleur was saying, the Israeli worry is that there is an Iranian hand behind this, and therefore they will perforce have to expand the arena of this conflict.
So 2 different parts to this. One is the question about where does Iran fit into this and whether that leads to a regional conflict, which would be disastrous for the world. Let's imagine that that is something that nobody, not the Iranians, not the Israelis, definitely not the Americans and the Europeans want. And so I think you're going to see a lot of back channel already started, but really trying to make sure that whatever escalation occurs stays bilateral between Hamas and the Israeli government and tries to avoid any spillover over regional. Whether we can pull that off is a different question. On the question of what happens in the immediate in Gaza, I think I agree with the deputy mayor. I think, this could have been a very different story had the Israeli government gone in with ground troops a week and a half ago, when that was quite a possibility. So this aerial bombardment, as horrific as the consequences are on the ground, bombs fall, people die, is still a chance. It gives us a window in which to continue to negotiate. There have been hostages released. Let's hope that we can continue to do that and that we can avoid the worst kind of consequences of an all-out ground invasion. That said, I mean, the public opinion question is a challenging one. The sympathy for Israel in the immediate aftermath of what happened with the Hamas's absolutely unconscionable, abominable attack on innocent citizens had shifted world opinion firmly over to Israel's side. That remains. But I think with each passing day, the question of what is the real plan for Gaza, can this be executed without incredible loss of civilian life among the Palestinian population, means that equation begins to shift. Right. And I think Israel, I don't envy anyone. I have my sympathies to everyone living in that country right now. I feel that trauma. But I think the question is, how do you negotiate a moment in which the world recognizes Hamas for what it is, without losing that popular sympathy in the world? And I think a ground invasion with the casualties that would inevitably come from that risks losing all that goodwill that Israel currently enjoys. Fleur, what the solution is, I don't know.
Fleur, is that the way you also see it? That the first challenge is to get the hostages back safely. We've had 4 hostages, 2 Americans, 2 Israelis being returned safely. Do you believe that's far better than any possibility of a ground invasion, which could involve a much larger loss of life? And that's the last thing we want to see. So, yes, it's happened before. There have been ground invasions of Gaza. But your sense, is there a firmness that first get the hostages out at all costs?
I would hope so. Look, I'm not a member of the security cabinet, so I can't tell you. I can tell you what the public opinion is, and I can tell you what the leaders that I speak to are saying. And for us, of course, the hostages are key, but equally, we are determined not to allow Hamas rule to continue in the Gaza Strip. I think they know that, and I think the world knows that Israel can no longer stand and pay sort of money through Qatar to buy a year of peace or buy a year of quiet. Those days when they bombard our cities in the south of Israel, there's a whole entire generation of kids who've grown up with rockets and running to shelters. I think this attack has basically made that no longer feasible. So whatever the outcome is, and I really do hope that they prioritize the hostages for us. Every life is, an entire world. Israel's a small country. Everybody knows somebody affected. Everybody knows somebody who's died. It's really awful right now, the trauma that the country is going through, the pain that we're going through. I've never felt this pain here before, and I've been here for quite a while. But equally as determined, whatever happened and in whatever order, is that Hamas can no longer continue to rule Gaza.
But where does that leave Netanyahu himself, Fleur Hassan? Because there's a sense that Mr. Netanyahu now is looking for his political survival as well, given the huge security lapse that resulted in this terrible, barbaric Hamas attack. So when a leader is looking at political survival, he can sometimes take the wrong decisions.
Well, all I can tell you is that we're so busy dealing with this war, with the displaced people, with the traumatized children, with the sick people in hospitals, injured, that I think that in Israel, after the unity government, there's now a feeling that we'll deal with all that when this nightmare is over, and whoever needs to be investigated, whoever needs to be in front of some type of inquiry will do so after the war is over. We do not have the bandwidth to deal with that right now.
But a ground offensive, is that inevitable according to you? Or if the hostages are released safely, there is still a possibility of a de-escalation? If the Hamas tomorrow was to release all the hostages, is there any possibility then of a de-escalation?
Well, again, like I said earlier, I think that Israel now has actually realized that they can no longer, that the Hamas regime in Gaza is no longer viable for us to live next to.
Given those words that you're hearing, Irfan, are we further away, therefore, for any possible early end to the conflict? That we are looking, therefore, at a prolonged conflict?
Well, I think if the Deputy Mayor's sentiment encapsulates what is the general sentiment, then yeah, we're in for a very long and ugly few months, right? A version of the world in which Hamas rule in the Gaza Strip is seen as being the red line. You simply cannot have that. It can only end in one way, and that is the complete removal of the Hamas leadership, either through targeted strikes or, of course, going in. We know that Hamas has used its time and power to build an incredible network of underground tunnels and bunkers. They are using their own citizens as human shields, in effect, right? It's a very densely populated plot of land. So if it is really that the only way this ends is with Hamas fully out of power and fully decapitated effectively, the only
But
way
every Palestinian, with due regard, Irfan, every Palestinian is not Hamas. And the tragedy is that there are innocent people who have nothing to do with Hamas who are going to lose their lives then, if we are talking about prolonged conflict.
And that is exactly right. I mean, so the challenge over here is, in fact, that because of the nature of the politics in the Gaza Strip and because of the nature of the urban density of that region, any action Israel takes has to walk the line between collective punishment of a population that is, as the Deputy Mayor, I think very charitably said, is also being held hostage effectively by the Hamas leadership and targeting the Hamas leadership itself. So it's a lose-lose in that the only way to get rid of Hamas is to sort of deal with the Gaza Strip, and then a lot of innocent lives are lost. But to leave them in place might be seen as unacceptable. I would like to believe that there is a compromise in there, and over the next couple of weeks, the politics is the art of possible, right? So what are the negotiations and conversations happening behind the scenes that might allow for some way for Israel to save face, to feel like they've defended their territorial integrity, defended their people, and also defanging and really sort of, crippling Hamas's ability to continue to lead. But whether that can be done, Rajdeep, requires a lot of other regional actors to step up and sort of take responsibility for saying it's partly our job to help de-escalate this. The Turkish Prime Minister made comments just yesterday in Parliament that are not helpful in this situation, essentially legitimizing and defending Turkey. But where does India stand in this situation? What can we be doing? Why is this all falling on Doha and Qatar to try and be the back channel? So we need other actors to step up and help find a way to make this hopefully end in a way that minimizes the loss of innocent life.
One final word from you, Flo Hassan Nahum. Is there a recognition within Israel that not every Palestinian is Hamas? And the belief that and they've got to recognize that and make that distinction much more sharply to ensure that Palestinians do not end up becoming even more angry and outraged with what they feel has been an open prison. That's their view, that Gaza has been an open prison. They've been treated as second-class citizens and dehumanized for much too long.
I don't understand where that comes from. It's obviously the brainwashing of Hamas, because like I said, we left in 2005. We are not occupying the Gaza Strip. Now, the fact that Fatah originally took power and then Hamas took power from Fatah and ended up killing half of the people of Fatah in the Gaza Strip, I don't think can also be blamed on Israel. It seems that everything that the leaders over there don't want to take responsibility for, it's just much simpler to blame Israel. We left in the hope that they would develop something. They could have developed Dubai, and they developed Beirut because, of course, they picked the genocidal partners that we have in the region. And so, the constant brainwashing that goes on there, the constant teaching of hatred that goes on there is a big part of the story. And the whole world is responsible for really helping fund an educational system through the UN that is teaching this hatred. But putting that aside, Gaza at the moment is unfortunately a very intricate web of military terrorism infrastructure that has been weaved into the civilian population, like the professor says, in order to make them into human shields. And it's a very, very difficult thing. And even with that, Israel warned the north of Gaza to move so that they could get rid of the infrastructure there. We are constantly looking to minimize civilian loss. That is not our objective, as opposed to their objective, which is only civilian loss. They're cowards. They don't want to fight our soldiers. What they want to do is kill babies. And so, unfortunately, in every conflict, in every war, there are innocent, killed, and injured. That is not our objective. We will do the maximum we can do. We're already doing the maximum that we can do. And, even when you look at this war as a civilizational clash, which I believe it is, because it's really Iran using their proxies against the free world, and you look at the Second World War as an example, there's a lot of German innocent lives that were also lost in order for the Allies to win and for the world to look the way that it looks today, rather than under a Nazi occupation and regime. And so we have to see this on a little bit of a wider lens and pray for the least possible casualties that we can on all sides.
Flo Hassan Nahum, Deputy Mayor Jerusalem, Irfan Nuruddin joining us there from Washington, D.C. Appreciate getting your perspectives, insightful perspectives here tonight. Thank you so much. Tonight's Get Real India story, a horrific video, remember, had surfaced a few months ago of a minor girl walking semi-naked and bleeding on the streets of Madhya Pradesh's Ujjain. Now the rape survivor's family story has taken a twist. The family claimed that the Madhya Pradesh government was lax in providing relief. The Madhya Pradesh government, which is facing a big election in a few weeks, has denied the charge and claims that all payments have been made. Take a look at tonight's Get Real India story.
A 12-year-old girl, semi-naked, her body partly covered with a small piece of cloth stained with blood, walked the streets of Ujjain a month ago, knocking on doors, seeking help. These heartbreaking images from Madhya Pradesh's Ujjain shocked the entire nation.
A month later, the survivor's father claims the family is yet to get any help from the Shivraj Singh Chauhan government.
हमको कोई जानकारी ही नहीं मिली, हमको कोई बताया ही नहीं है, तो हम कहां से बोल देंगे कि हमको मिली है राशि.
The Madhya Pradesh government has denied the charge. It claims a total of 4.5 lakh rupees, including 3 lakh from State Women and Child Development Department, has been deposited in the victim's grandfather's account.
तो तकरीबन 4 लाख रुपए की सहायता राशि तो उनको उज्जैन और उनके दूसरे लोगों ने सहयोग किया है और 50,000 रुपए की नगद राशि तो कलेक्टर साहब ने सैंक्शन किया.
Now family says that after media pressure, they have received the money.
कलेक्टर आए रहे.
क्या बात हुई?
मैडम भी आई थी. हाँ, तो पैसा भी दिए हैं बिटिया को 50,000. खाता खुलवाए हैं और बिटिया खाता में डरवा देंगे है.
Bureau Report, India Today.
This script is over. The news tonight leaves you here. You stay well, stay safe. Good night, Shubh Ratri. Jai Hind. Namaskar.